I'm hoping everybody can see that now, and
Yes,
we're
I
recording
can
it.
assure you we
Good.
can see you.
Okay, Louise, thank you for that welcome. And the name, you almost got it right. I'll correct that in a moment. But look, hi everybody, from the other side of the pond. I'm a long way from Canada. We have an ocean in between us, and we're at different time zones. So the sun is going down here, and the evenings coming in soon. I know it's afternoon there, so thanks for taking time out of your day to come across. What do we have in common? Well, we have in common the fact that several years ago, a group of Canadians came across, led by Marilyn Means, and I was able to take them around and show them some of my beautiful island. And so that's the link. And I also have in common, I had the great pleasure of visiting your city of Toronto with my family 2 years ago. Loved it, loved being in Canada. I want to come back. So that's two things we have in common. What else do we have in common? Well, we have in common a remarkable story. And you can see from the first slide a reference to that, the Canadian Red Cross Society Prisoners Parcel, the British Channel Islands, Second World War. Our two, I won't say nations, it's hard to call Jersey a nation, but our two communities are integrated through the story. And the purpose of tonight is to illuminate you with that story. So I'm going to launch on. I'll introduce myself in a second, but I'm going to launch on. So, um, okay, I think, I need to start the story by saying at the end of 1944, people living in the British Channel Islands were facing starvation. A really serious matter, hard for me to imagine, I'm sure hard for most of us to imagine, but they were facing starvation. And despite being very agriculturally rich islands, they are agriculturally rich. They don't produce enough food to feed themselves or their populations. The food here is mostly produced for export, and they don't have enough to feed themselves. And not only that, there was 30,000 German servicemen in the island alongside islanders. We were occupied, and those occupiers were staying and they were eating our food, and therefore the situation was extremely gloomy and very dim. And out of the depths of winter came a ship, and that ship is the picture you see in front of you. It's the SS Vega. I'll explain more about that later. But the SS Vega was bearing food parcels, and those food parcels primarily came from Canada. They were shipped from your country to Europe, and then via the ship, the Vega, into our islands. And it truly was manna from heaven, as I'll explain as the talk goes on. So we have an eternal gratitude both to the Vega, the Red Cross, and to Canada. And I'm going to explain why that is and how this thing came about. So I think what I'm going to talk about tonight, the backstory. We'll talk a little about how we got to where we are in terms of 1944. That's important to set the scene. We'll talk about the situation at the end of 1944. Why were we in this position where we needed outside help? We'll talk about the Vega, and we'll talk about liberation, which follows. And of course, it's actually the 80th anniversary of our liberation this year. So it's a very important year for us. And I'll reflect on the legacy of these parcels and the events. A bit about me. So I've lived in Jersey all my life. My parents came from the UK after the war. In fact, if I had time, I'd explain the story. They came here probably because of the war, not because they were after the war, I should say. I'm a historian. I'm a writer. I'm a passionate lover of our island's history, and I spend a lot of time researching it and also telling people about it. Nothing I enjoy better. So I'm looking forward to seeing this talk. The Channel Islands, look at that picture. What can I say? Small islands, peculiarly, if that's a word, strangely, despite being only sort of 15 miles from France and 100 from England, they are British islands. They're not part of the UK. They are independent crown dependencies. We run our own affairs, but we are part of the British Isles, and King Charles is our king, and that situation dates back to the 12th and 13th centuries, when we were part of Normandy, and Normandy invaded Britain, as probably know, in 1066. And then after that, we were the last remnants of the King of England's Norman realm. So he held on to us, foothold south side of the Channel, fortified us. We spent 700 years defending ourselves against French attacks. If you come to our island, you'd see endless castles and towers and various other things. And we as a result of that, we have a peculiar history, and that history is partly reflected by the story I'm going to tell tonight. I should have put up the little map there. You can see where we are: Jersey, Guernsey, France below us, England to the north. Jersey being the largest isle, that's where I'm based, or that's where I live. Guernsey being a bit smaller, Alderney, Sark, a bunch of other little islands. But slap in the embrace of France, but very much British. And when the Second World War started, of course, we were a British island, and we were part of the British forces that went across and served in the early part of the war. But of course, um, as that war in France in 1940 goes very badly wrong and ends at Dunkirk and subsequently with the fall in Paris, then our situation changes very dramatically here in Jersey, and this is what leads to the situation that we're going to talk about. So, what happened? Well, in 1940, in July 1940, after the fall of France, the Germans arrived in the Channel Islands, and they logically took them over. Britain didn't attempt to defend the islands. It was going to be too difficult in the face of overwhelming German air power. It would have cost a lot of lives. Britain didn't have the means, and Britain had better things to do, and so effectively wrote us off and declared us open and allowed the Germans to come in largely without any opposition. They did bomb briefly to probe our defences and sadly killed some islanders, but they arrived on the 1st of July 1940 and set about occupying our islands. When they first came, they were victorious in France. They thought they would be victorious in the Battle of Britain. They assumed the war would be over. They made very little effort to fortify or defend our islands, and they went on a charm offensive. They went out to prove themselves to be civilized, not these dastardly Nazis that was being reported in the newspapers. And islanders were pleasantly surprised to find that the occupiers, at first at least, were behaving very correctly and very courteously towards islanders. So that lasted a short while. Failure in the Battle of Britain meant that, of course, the war would go on, and then Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union in 1941 took most of the German armed forces in that direction, in the eastern direction, leaving the West vulnerable to counterattack. And from that point forward, the Germans went to great efforts to fortify these islands, the Channel Islands, because their location, if you recall from the map I showed you a moment ago, very close to France, in the middle of the bay, the Gulf of St. Malo. In order to invade France, between Cherbourg and Brest, you have to take these islands. So they set about fortifying the island and heavily militarizing what we have here. And the legacy of that is very plain to this day. The islands are full to the brim with concrete fortifications and the remains of this time. So they got on with doing their job of fortifying the island. And they began gradually imposing greater levels of um, uh, uh, greater levels of control over islanders, greater levels of control of islands, began introducing increasingly draconian laws. The Germans and the civilian authorities got on well enough. They had to, because it was in the interest of both parties that the islands remained fairly placid and the food continued flowing in. When when the occupation began, of course, the food from the UK was cut off, so they re-established food lines through France. They encouraged a lot of additional growing of food here. So traditionally, we grow potatoes here in Jersey. It's our export crop. The Jersey Royal is very famous in the UK. We moved to wheat crops and cereals in order to try and feed ourselves. It was always a problem because we simply didn't grow enough, and we certainly didn't have the ability to produce a lot of the vital supplies that were needed here in Jersey. So it was a continual battle between finding the supplies and keeping the people and the islanders fed. Um, the Germans imposed considerable rules around our lives. They tried to encourage islanders to work on the fortification program. When that failed or proved unsuccessful, they brought very large working groups of workers from Europe, including slave laborers. They managed to establish communications between Jersey and the UK via the Red Cross. Our first engagement with the Red Cross was through a messaging service that allowed islanders, who of course were cut off from the UK and relatives in the UK, to transfer messages through Geneva and into the UK and back and forth. So we managed to establish a life around this. It became increasingly difficult as the food became tighter and more and more German troops arrived. Then there was less and less to go around. So rationing, which came up very early, gradually increased as the occupation went on. It also became quite plain from about 1942 onwards the nature of the regime that we were dealing with. So far from the benevolent, courteous regime that started, they began deporting islanders from Jersey, primarily because it was a tit for tat when Britain deported German nationals from Iran. Hitler demanded a response, and so Channel Islanders were deported from here to Germany, camps in Germany. So islanders that weren't born in Jersey had a matter of 24 hours, 48 hours to pack their whatever they could bring and leave the island.
Yep.
We also saw, as I mentioned, slave workers come into the island. These fortifications were built by a very large workforce, many of which were badly treated and harshly lived in very poor conditions. And islanders were very aware of this. The Germans also began clamping down on radios, freedom of speech, movement, ability to say certain things. It became very difficult for islanders to carry on their lives as normal. And those that broke the rules, well, they suffered prison here in Jersey if it was a minor infringement. Anything more serious, they were sent to France, to a French prison, and anything more serious, sedition or in any way undermining the German war effort, or just doing things that we might take for granted now, such as sheltering an escaped Russian slave worker, were seen as very serious. And islanders that fell foul of those rules ended up in concentration camps in Germany, and 21 islanders never returned from that process. So sadly, we had islanders losing lives. Islands are also isolated, of course. They had a messaging service. They were able to clandestinely listen to the radio, but it was a very closed off existence here. Not really know what was going on. Not really know what would happen next. There were hopes, of course. There was a long-standing hope that Britain would attempt to reconquer us, and indeed, in the early days of occupation, Winston Churchill was very keen that the island should be retaken, and they made plans to do that. But very quickly, more level-headed British military people said, Mr. Prime Minister, it would be fruitless. It would cost a lot of British lives, it would cost a lot of islanders' lives, and it would achieve nothing particularly. So Britain decided from mid-war onwards, or even earlier, that the islanders would not be taken back. But we didn't know that, of course. D-Day, June the 6th, 1945, was a milestone moment for us here in the Channel Islands because, well, Normandy is 50, 60 miles away as the crow flies. When the invasion started, the night before, the American paratroopers going in around Saint-Mary-Église and Cherbourg Peninsula flew over the islands. The next day, islanders could see smoke rising from France. We're close enough to see France from here. And great excitement followed. The sense that we were now going to be freed at last. This invasion was going to liberate us as well. But that didn't happen. As I mentioned, the British had already decided not to attempt to retake these islands. Islanders didn't know that, and the Germans didn't know that. From 6th of June 1944 onwards, D-Day, things got even tougher here in Jersey because, or in the Channel Islands, I should say, because the Germans were naturally expecting the Allies to attack, and therefore placed even greater restrictions on islanders' lives. They didn't attack. They had no plans to attack, but islanders were able to follow the invasion. They could see it advancing along the coast of France, up towards Cherbourg first, and then in August 1944 down towards St. Malo, which is the key port for the Germans in Jersey. And if you look at the map, the two ports that were used to ship goods into Jersey and Guernsey, so these are supplies of food, essential items, fuel, everything that we need effectively to survive, came through Granville and St. Malo. Granville fell first, and then in mid-August 1944, the Americans closed in on St. Malo, the port of St. Malo, and captured it. And so at that point, we were cut off, and islanders realized that things were going to get very, very difficult. It had been challenging to date, but without any supplies coming in at all, we had for example, in Jersey, 40,000 islanders and about 10,000 Germans. That's 50,000 mouths to feed. And we simply didn't have the food to feed them. And we were heading towards a winter when traditionally, obviously, the fishing is tougher and the crops are not growing and so on. So, very, very difficult situation. Um, and the islanders had a great sense of isolation at this point, even far worse than before. They'd seen the Allies conquering France, or at least they'd heard it. They knew through clandestine radio messages what was going on in France, and they knew that from August 1944, the direction of travel was not towards them in Jersey and Guernsey, but away towards Paris and the German frontier. So it was very obvious that they were being left alone, that unlikely that liberation was going to happen. Um, the plan was that the Allies would starve the Germans into surrender. They weren't going to attack. They would cut off their supplies, and therefore they would eventually have to surrender with a lack of supplies. But of course, starving Germans meant you starved islanders as well. So that was a particularly brutal decision of war that would have huge ramifications for islands potentially. So as we went into the autumn of 1944, people were extremely nervous here in the islands, not knowing what would happen next, and wondering what their fate was going to be. It's an interesting quote. I pulled it out of the local newspaper. You can have a look, but fundamentally, the excitement that grew on D-Day and after D-Day was crushed at this moment as the realization came that they were not going to be liberated, that all the fighting was not coming here. We were stuck with Germans, with occupation, and with the fate of whatever was dealt with us through a very, very difficult time. So islanders felt a great sense of isolation, a great sense of missing out, a great sense of being left behind and being forgotten, quite frankly. And of course, when you're trying to sustain a population, it isn't just about the food; it's the psychological strength that's needed to see you through very difficult times. And islanders in the autumn of 1944 were definitely feeling psychologically very limited and very exposed. Some chose to leave. It is an interesting time in our history that up until D-Day and the fall and the Battle of Normandy and the fall of the capture by the Allies of the Peace of France close to Jersey, it was very difficult to escape. A few tried, one succeeded. They managed to get across the Channel. That's 100 miles to England. Very few attempted it. But in the autumn of 1944, a lot of young islands, particularly who had grown up for 4 years of occupation, we'd been under German rule for 4 years by then, were quite fed up and decided that it was time to leave. And so, in this autumn of 1944, October, November, December, quite a lot of islanders got into small boats and they set off for France. Most made it, I'm very pleased to say, despite them not being sailors, despite it being dark. They had to leave under the cover of darkness. They had to row out because there were German guards all along the coast, and then hope that their engine would start and navigate out through a rocky sea and make it to France. The majority did. But the stone you can see there, the monument recalls four young islanders. They were called Ronnie and Madeleine Bisson. They were recently married, 19 and 22. Roy Lucien's, he was 20, and Andre Gourville was 19. They set off from the east coast of Jersey, which is closer to France. Their engine wouldn't start when they got out, when they rowed out from the harbour. And the next morning, sun up the next morning, found them off our north coast, which is enormously rocky with little coves. They were nowhere near a cove, and they smashed into the rocks and were all killed. All these young islands were killed. So tragically, some of the islanders couldn't wait and didn't know what would happen, didn't want to wait to know what would happen, and decided to get out. And sadly, some of them lost their lives. But those that did get out, some of them bore a message from our government here in Jersey to the British authorities saying, what is going on? We are in up against it. We have no food, or the food is running out, and things are getting very desperate. What are you going to do about it? So we were reaching out, if you like, to try and remind Britain, which let's not forget is a nation that we are part of, that the islanders were in a very difficult situation. The guy that was reaching out was our bailiff, Alexander Coutange. There's a picture, rather grainy picture of him on there. But our bailiff, for those, well, for most of you probably, the bailiff is the civil head here in Jersey. So in Jersey we have and Guernsey a lieutenant governor who's the king's representative, if you like, the government of Britain's representative, and we have a bailiff, and the bailiff is an ancient office, and they're the civic head, the kind of mayor, come speaker of the parliament, come all round number one first citizen. And during the occupation, Alexander Coutange, who was a legal person, a lawyer, uh, was represented both of those roles. The lieutenant governor had gone in 1940. He was head of everything to do with the island, and he was a very astute, very measured, and very forceful character. We're very grateful for that because he was able to, through sheer force of will and tenacity, keep the Germans in check. He reminded them of the law continuously. He also thought very, very carefully about his moves and how he could honor his pledge to islanders, which was effectively, if you stay with me during this period, I'll get you through and make sure you're okay out the other side. So our bailiff Alexander Coutange was obviously considerably worried about the situation that was looming. Starvation, effectively, and of course not only starvation, but no medicines, no basics of life, no, sanitation is very difficult. All the things, fuel, that society needs. So he was the one that told the young people escaping, raised our concerns. He also made representations to the Germans, of course, explaining that the situation was becoming very difficult and something had to be done. The Germans, ironically, agreed. They fully agreed that something had to be done because they were also going to starve here. And as long as there was 40,000 islanders in Jersey, and I'll reflect on Jersey because it's my island, but the same situation in Guernsey, as long as there's 40,000 islanders, there's less food for the Germans. So the Germans did suggest, you can take the islanders off. They said to the British, through Switzerland, the neutral power, take the islanders away, and they're your people. You have them, and that's it, and then they won't starve. And or send food in, and you can feed the island. We're quite happy with that. Now, what were they doing that for? Well, one is, of course, they saw that if the islanders left, there'd be a lot more food for the Germans that remained. It would be beneficial, advantageous to the Germans to remove the islanders. And of course, if they sent food in, that would feed islanders, which meant there was more food for the Germans. So from a humanitarian perspective, yes, of course, you want to save the islanders. But from a military perspective, well, that wasn't necessarily the case. And of course, we have Winston Churchill as the Prime Minister, our wartime leader. And Churchill was having none of it. Churchill basically said, look, under the rules of law, they're your problem. Islanders are your problem. You need to make sure they're fed. You know what happens if you break these rules. And basically, you're there you are, and there you remain. If you wish it to change, surrender, and we'll end it. And quite famously or infamously, Churchill scribbled some words in a memo that he was looking at when he was having one of these meetings, and it said, "Let them starve, let them starve." And islanders never really forget that because, of course, we know he was talking about the Germans, but there was always the suspicion that he may have been talking about islanders. Let them starve. Churchill had a dim view of the Channel Islands during this period. He felt he was very bitter that they were given up in the first place. That's not our fault. That was British Army's fault. And then he felt that islanders should be doing much more to resist German occupation, maybe blowing up trains or cutting throats or other things that may have gone on elsewhere. But of course, the islands are very small. We have no mountains or forests, and therefore islanders resisted in their own way, which was largely passive resistance, not active resistance. Anyway, the point would be that Churchill was against feeding the islanders. The situation dragged on through the autumn of 1945, and pressure was placed upon the British government, partly through the messages that were coming out from Jersey, and these made their way to the floor of the House of Commons, Parliament. Questions were asked about what was going to be done, because we have to be very mindful that these were British. We are British citizens. This is not, with all respect to people living in France and Belgium and Holland and elsewhere, Europeans. We are British, and these were British people that were going to starve. So it was a very difficult situation. In the end, Churchill relented and he agreed that supplies could be sent to the Channel Islands on the condition they were only sent to for islanders' use. The Germans would not be able to take any of the supplies, and that agreement was passed between Germany and Britain effectively through the good offices of the International Red Cross based in Switzerland. So, I'm sure many, and particularly people who are involved in the organization today, are familiar with the Red Cross and its activities. I won't begin to pretend I have a great expertise in the area. I can tell you, of course, the Red Cross was formed in the 1860s after battles in northern Italy, featuring Austria and France, Savoy. One man in particular was so horrified by what the treatment of the wounded, particularly, that he established a humanitarian regime to protect the wounded, and that gradually expanded to caring for non-combatants in wartime and enforcing some of the rules around war. And of course, they're still doing that today, to their absolute credit. Based in Geneva, Switzerland, it had a great role to play, and it was the intermediary between the British and the German authorities in the question of Channel Islands and other communities as well. So, through agreement with the Red Cross, there was a decision, a permission that supplies would be sent to the Channel Islands, and a ship was available. The Red Cross ship, the SS Vega. She was a fairly elderly vessel, constructed before the First World War, Swedish, about 1,000 tons, chartered by the Red Cross in 1939 for humanitarian efforts, and based in Lisbon, where the Red Cross obviously had access to ports. And after agreement was reached, the supplies were put onto the Vega and dispatched on 20th of December 1944 to the Channel Islands. This relief that we were hoping for and praying for here. So what were those supplies? Well, those supplies were in the main Canadian Red Cross parcels. So I'm going to probably embarrass myself by trying to talk about the Canadian Red Cross now. This is where I get into sticky waters or choppy waters if people don't know. But you'll know that the Canadian Red Cross, I think, formed before or before the First World War and came into its own, I think, during the First World War, supporting the troops, supporting populations, supporting POWs in France from Canadian troops, looking after Canadian wounded and so on. So carved out a special role for themselves during that period, as did many other Red Cross organizations. When the Second World War broke out, they took up their same responsibilities again, or their same aims again, which was to support Canadians overseas, and particularly support Canadian soldiers that were incarcerated as prisoners of war in Europe. And what they did was to send them food parcels. And you can see the picture on the right, or maybe yes, I think on one side of the slide, the Canadian women packing these food parcels. So huge effort made to raise money and enable this work to go ahead. Canadians rolled up their sleeves and supported their boys overseas. So they packed the parcels in Canada with Canadian goods, of course, designed and okay, so yes, parcels packed, sent, sitting on the docks in Lisbon and awaiting a destination, which should have been Canadian prisoners of war, but actually turns out to be the Channel Islands. So what are in these Red Cross parcels? Well, there's a picture on the screen now, as you can see, one in Jersey. They're held in great honor here in Jersey because of their symbolism. But typically, chocolate, biscuits, sardines, milk powder. The tin was labeled Klim. You can see it at the back of the picture there, KLIM, milk spelt backwards, which was particularly loved by the people here in Jersey because they put their finger into the Klim and put it in their mouth and were overwhelmed with this taste. Was something they just missed for all that time. Salmon, corned beef, raisins, sugar, marmalade, butter, spam, stuff that we would take for granted in some ways, although it looks pretty good. But for islanders that had gone without, this wasn't just since the autumn of 1944, but they'd gone without for 4 years of many of these things. It was very much a moment of quite amazement. So these parcels arrived. You can see the SS Vega there in Jersey Harbor, and they went to Guernsey first. The ship arrived in Guernsey on the 27th of December, 1944, and unloaded one-third of the parcels there in Guernsey, and arrived in Jersey on the 31st of December, 1944, a couple of days later, and unloaded the remainder here. And what came on that first voyage? Well, you can see 1,000, nearly 120,000 standard food parcels, diet supplement parcels, salt, soap, cigarette. Well, you can see what they parcels were the main thing, but also other items are coming, including a small amount of clothing for children and babies. So this was extraordinary stuff as far as the islands were concerned. It was something that we hadn't seen for this time, and this was just the first of 5 Vega visits, 6, forgive me, Vega visits. So other goods would come in due course. Now, a picture of them unloading the parcels there. The St. John's Ambulance, an organisation which I'm sure you're familiar with in Canada, a voluntary organisation that provides healthcare. Well, they were entrusted with the job of doing the unloading and guarding and distributing the parcels. The Germans insisted that a recognised organisation had to do it, and it was the Red Cross, the St. John's Ambulance that were given that role, and they performed it stoically. To the Germans' credit, they didn't steal any of the parcels. Churchill's fears were unfounded. They didn't steal them. They allowed them to be distributed. There may have been some individual pilfering, and certainly there's a story I heard recently where some flour was spilt as they were bringing a bag of flour ashore, and the Germans were scooping it up desperately from the floor because the Germans were extremely hungry at this stage as well. But they did not steal the parcels. The parcels were then distributed out around the island, and islanders were told to come and pick up their parcels. And you see the wonderful picture on the screen now. It's one of the iconic pictures of the occupation period. This is a Jersey family. They've gone and collected their parcels. They've obviously got some parcels for people at home and so on. And the young girl at front is holding hers very closely to make sure nothing happens to this parcel, because islanders were quite amazed by what they found in these parcels. And the parcels, of course, didn't just represent food. The Canadian Red Cross parcels didn't just represent food, clim, chocolate, salt, sugar, so on. They represented hope, because they told islanders that they were not forgotten, that the island was in the minds of people. Higher powers were worried about what was going on here, and people were concerned about their future. And although the parcels themselves were pretty small in terms of what they could deliver, and they clearly weren't going to feed an island of 40,000 people forever, they represented something far more spiritual than that. This was a crucial moment for islanders, and gave them the hope, really, and the determination to see their way through the remainder of the war. There was a remainder of the war. The parcels came at the end of 1944. We had to endure until May 1945 under still very, very difficult times. And although more parcels arrived, the Germans themselves got very tetchy in this period, or very quite fierce during this period, because we were under a quite strict regime here at the end, and they threatened to fight to the last bullet. And there was rumors they might use the islanders as bargaining chips and hostages and all sorts of things. So right to the very end of the war, although the food was coming in and people felt great hope, nobody really knew how the war was going to end and how our occupation would end. It ended on the 9th of May 1945, and the picture you see on the screen now is the Pomdor Hotel in our capital, St. Helier. British soldiers climbed onto the balcony, having landed that day, hauled down the swastika. This was the German naval headquarters during the occupation. And they raised the British flag, the Union Jack, and at that point signified Britain, the island, coming back into British control. And islanders to this day, on the 9th of May, we have a bank holiday, a day off. Our Liberation Day, it's celebrated in that location, in that square. They reenact the flag raising and make very merry on that day. And we have done it for the last 79 years. We have our 80th anniversary this year. So tremendous memories from this day and what it signifies, but also tremendous memories of Red Cross, Canadian food parcels, and the Vega. Certainly in the years immediately after the Second World War, people got back on with their lives. They did their work, and they worried less about the occupation. Because as the period, as the generation that lived through occupation grew older, they began wanting to memorialize, reflect, talk, and begin thinking again about these moments in time. And one of the most important was certainly the Red Cross parcels. And you can see at our harbour, there's a very large memorial now to the Vega, and it tells the story of the Canadian Red Cross parcels that meant so much to islanders. You can also see, the SS Vega there. Don't think it was made of matchsticks, but anyway, these volunteers made the Vega. I think they may well have been people that were around in the occupation. It meant something tremendous to them. And for every year, there would be a lot of the people that had benefited coming together and talking about and celebrating and commemorating the Vega, and the parcels would come out. Some were not all were eaten; they became museum pieces and so on. So a real sense of connection here between Red Cross, Canada, and this moment in our history. We are at an interesting point, however, now in our history, because most of the people who lived through occupation, bar the youngest, are no longer with us. It's 80 years, of course. And very few people will remember these events. They have second-hand and third-hand memories. So there's a question about how we continue recalling and memorializing and remembering these tremendous events and this connection. And I think that's why tonight's interrupted talk is so important to us in the Channel Islands, as well as I'm sure to Canadians. It reaffirms in a small way this connection, which should be a lifelong connection. I'm sure nobody intends it to be anything less, between our two communities and the hope that the Canadian parcels brought to us. They weren't intended for us, but we were grateful for them anyway. And I think that's something that's certainly worth talking about. So for me, it's been a great pleasure talking to you and giving you some aspects of our history, Ireland's history, and particularly reminding all of us of this time and link that's so important. My email's there. It's being recorded, so I'm sure if anybody wants to contact me, I'm very delighted to talk further. But I now believe I will hand back to Louise and with that and open the floor to questions, I think.
Yep, that's the plan. We're just going to go to gallery view in a second.
Yep.
While you were offline, I gave the explanation of how we're going to handle the Q&A so that we had some concurrent activity that you weren't aware of. So basically, again, if you're out there, you will be allowed to unmute yourself now. We've taken the controls off that. And so if there's someone out there, there's a hand. So I'm going to go right to John Azar first, because that's the first hand I see. So John, if you'd unmute yourself, your way to go.
Hi, John.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can indeed.
Okay, great. That was terrific. Thank you. Now, as islands, obviously a lot of fishing, but was there much smuggling going on during this period? And how risky was that for the smugglers?
The answer is no. I'm smiling because Jersey's got a history of smuggling. So when we're not at war with France, when we weren't at war with France, we were very good smugglers. So a lot of stuff did get smuggled to the island in older history, but not in this period. You weren't allowed to take boats offshore. You could take boats offshore to fish, but you had to have permission, and you had to have a German in the boat with you. So fishing boats going off. And we don't have a huge fishing fleet, but fishing boats going offshore had a German in the boat with them. So there was no opportunity to escape, really, and no opportunity to pick up goods from somewhere else and bring it to Jersey. So no, the answer is no. But smuggling is certainly a big part of our history.
Yes, thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Ian McGill, you're next. If you want to.
Hi, Ian.
He's just going to unmute, I think. We're going to give him a minute. There you go. Ian, can you unmute yourself? Yeah. He's got his hand up, but he's not unmuted, unfortunately. is there some reason why, Tom, can you take a look and see if there's some reason Ian can't unmute? There he goes.
You've got me now.
Okay,
Okay.
there you go. Yeah, can hear you.
Hi, Ian.
Well, thank you, Ian and Louise and the Friends of the Canadian War Museum for the presentation, and also the Red Cross and the Channel Island refugee people for keeping people alive.
Yeah.
I have a special interest because both my grandparents were marooned in Jersey. My grandfather died shortly after the Germans. My grandmother was there left alone with her 4 sons fighting the Germans and the Japanese.
Okay.
And she has very, very bitter memories, actually, what went on. She wasn't bitter about not being rescued by the British, because she thought, you know, they had to take their fair share.
Yeah.
But our question to you now is that what is the feeling in Jersey and Guernsey of the islanders about their feeling of being marooned? Have they reconciled that? Or bitter?
It's a really good question, Ian. Thank you for that. Jersey and Guernsey. I mean, I'll speak for Jersey more than Guernsey. Jersey's a curious place because although we are part of Britain and have been since time immemorial, really. We're not British. We're Jersey first and foremost. And we're not French, although we're 14 miles away from French and we spoke French for much of our history. We're not French. We're Jersey, and therefore islanders had a curious relationship with the outside world, real islanders, stock islanders. And therefore, when the British left, a lot of them probably would have said, well, that's that, we're not going, Jersey's our home and you're British, you should go back. And that's just the way it is. So I don't think there was a great deal of regret at that time or animosity towards Britain. There was certainly a bit, but not a huge amount. Later, I suspect, yes, there was a certain amount of bitterness, maybe, and suspicion that we were being left alone for political reasons, something of that nature. But what happened very quickly after occupation, very shrewdly. So one thing that's interesting: Winston Churchill never visited Jersey and Guernsey after the war. Now, whether that was purposeful or not, I don't know. He definitely had a thing against us. And in fact, what he did do when occupation ended, he sent in MI6, the spy people, the military branch of it, to investigate how the islanders had collaborated in the Second World War, because he was convinced that had gone on. And they asked questions and they interviewed people and they looked at various records and they came back with the conclusion there was no overt collaboration between the authorities. There was, of course, collaborators, as there would have been anywhere, but there was no overt collaboration. There was cooperation to the extent it needed to cooperate because, frankly, we'd left them alone in 1940. What else were they going to do? So Churchill, I think, was disappointed that they didn't find a smoking gun, and we had a clean bill of health. Anyway, what was very shrewd is the King and Queen visited Jersey in June 1945, 1 month after occupation. Very soon after occupation, they flew in. They came in by ship, and islanders. Whatever we think about the politicians in Britain. Now, remember, Prince Winston Churchill was not our prime minister. He was the prime minister of Britain. We owe our allegiance to the crown. So these couple turned up, the King and Queen, and we welcomed them with open arms. And we were hugely appreciative of these two coming across. They said all the right things. Welcome back. We've never, very nice. And islanders, I think, probably at that point said, okay, let bygones be bygones. And that Mr. Churchill can think what he thinks, but we're British to the core. And so I no doubt there was individuals and mutterings and still, to this day, this "let 'em starve" is a very famous phrase. I don't know if Churchill did mean islanders, but anyway, it isn't. Very quickly, things got back to normal very quickly here in Jersey, which was us running our affairs, respecting the King and Queen, and working with Britain where we had to work with them. So I hope that answers your question. It's a long-winded answer.
Thanks very much. Very good.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, well, based on what I see here, it looks like I'm just going to come. It looks like we don't have any more. If just double check the chat here and see if I see a question. No, other than Linda Caldwell remarks that it's an amazing story. And
I can see Barbara. Barbara's got a hand up.
Okay, Barbara, where you go? I didn't see Barbara had a hand up, but Barbara
just popped up.
Okay, Barbara, if you'd happily, if you'd unmute, please, you're welcome to come on. I'm sure she's working on her. There we go, Barbara. You have to chat now. Well, Barbara's mute is off. Barbara, are you there? Okay, so we got Barbara's mute off, but Barbara's not We're having some difficulty here. Technical issues.
Technical difficulties. That's life.
Technical difficulties. Yes.
I
Okay.
can see Jim as well. Jim Washbrook.
Yeah. Yeah, Jim, if you want to, Jim, Barbara, if you eventually become sorted out, just speak and then we'll get you in next. Okay. So Jim, go ahead. Yeah. He's unmuted, but we don't have any luck.
Hi, Jim.
Oh, well, we don't have Jim yet, but we do have Barbara's. We can see Barbara. No, we can't hear you, Barbara.
Barbara, do you have a microphone or something that you can turn up?
We're just trying to get Barbara going here.
Or Jim?
Yeah. Okay, still can't hear you, Barbara, just so you know that. Nice to see you back from Cambodia and Thailand or wherever you were, because I remember you were off somewhere. Okay, so we're going to go to Jim. Jim, do you want to see if you can come in? Because we're not having you're off microphone as well. And then John's got his hand up. John, are you able to talk? Is this our system?
Yeah.
Oh. So John, you get to go because we can't get Barbara or Jim yet. So John, you get another question.
Well, maybe just pull away from the history for a little bit. Ian, what's the state of affairs now in the Channel Islands in terms of relationship to Britain and the mainland and Brexit? And how are you doing on the Channel Islands?
That's a good question. So we're doing well. Okay, firstly, we're doing well. That's plain. We're a very wealthy little island. We're a offshore finance center. We make our money through through people, rich people, and others putting money through. So we do very well. Brexit didn't bother us particularly because we were never part of Europe. Although Britain was in Europe, we weren't. We had a strange relationship where we decided not to go in. So it didn't affect us that much. It's a bit of a pest because we're going to have to start. We have to have our passport stamped and various things going in France at the moment. But the island is in a very good place. The challenge for the longer term is an aging population and less economic, like anywhere else, an aging population, less economic, younger population. The stuff that's flowing on that we talked about, the global situation is obviously not affecting us directly, but will indirectly affect us. But we remain the same relationship fundamentally that we had back in the 1940s, which is we owe our allegiance to the king. Our laws are passed locally, our taxes are set locally. They're ratified by what's called the Privy Council, which is effectively a group of British politicians, but not elected politicians. But pretty good, pretty good.
Great. Thank you.
Barbara, any chance that we can hear you now?
You tell me.
Yes.
Yes.
Yay. Okay, Barbara, over to you.
All right, Ian, this
Yes.
is a personal question. I was on the tour with
6 foot, 6 foot, just over 6 foot.
That's not the question.
Okay, not that personal. Okay, all right.
No. I was on the tour with Marilyn.
Okay.
I had the pleasure of sitting next to at a lunch.
You're right. I do recall. It was a while back,
and
but I
we
recall.
had a lovely conversation about your daughter about to go to university, leaving the island, and you were quite concerned that she was going to, I don't know if you called it the mainland, but the UK.
Mainland.
Anyway, so let me know, did she go? Did you survive? Did she?
Barbara, that's a real great question, Ed, because it feels like a long time ago. No, so listen, she's not here. It's okay. She doesn't live here anymore. She didn't go. We went to lots of universities, and then in the end she said, Dad, I just can't go. And I said, well, don't worry about it, darling, because not everybody does go. Because folks, you need to know that we have some a tertiary level education here in Jersey, but most kids will leave Jersey and go to UK universities. And she didn't go. But what she did, she wanted to be a music teacher. That was her dream. Okay, so we said, well, look, so get a job in music, just an admin role. She did that. She took on some private students. She got a bit of work. She's now a brilliant music teacher. She did a distance degree a couple of years ago, which enabled her to get a job as in our local education system. She's spot on. So thank you. But my son, who was younger even still then, he's just finishing Aberdeen University. He's been there for 4 years, up in the wilds of Scotland. and he's just coming to the end of that. But anyway, that's a lovely question, Barbara. Thank you for remembering.
Okay, now, before we're just coming up to the 30-minute point, so I'm going to take this opportunity to just cut in and say that we will be taking the recorded once we chop it all up, hopefully.
Yeah, cut that bit out where I disappear.
Ed's gonna fix all this. I have great faith in it. We will post this. We'll send you the links just so you all know that this is posted. Plus, it'll be on the main YouTube site, so it can be searched. So all that to say that we're going to do that. Now we have some way we want to gift you. One of the ways, the way we're going to do it is to say thank you to you, Ian, is we have a program called Adopt a Book for the War Museum, where the War Museum gives the Friends a list of about 50 books or so that they would like for their reference museum, reference library. And then we as the Friends generally find a way to donate them, either as individual members who are the Friends who'd adopt a book. In our case, we're going to adopt a book on your behalf, and we'll put inside the insert that it's from you as part of that program.
That's a lovely gesture.
Yes, we will adopt a book for the War Museum on your behalf to say thank you very much, Ian, for having spent the time with us this afternoon. And on behalf of the Friends, I thank both the Friends that are online, for those who are not Friends, but who found a way to come to this today. And of course, the Red Cross that we've never had online before. And we're really glad that they came and joined us today. So thank you to you all. And I hope that you, I should tell you that next month, at the end of the month, Thursday, the 29th at 7 p.m., we will be having a presentation, but this one virtual will be all about the 100th anniversary of the Canadian Army Medical Corps, and in particular, Dr. Andrew MacPhail, and that legacy that Andrew MacPhail has contributed to the medical community writ large. So that's a fairly big one again for us. It will be virtual. It'll be 7 o'clock in the evening, Eastern Standard Time. So that's the plan. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us. And I look forward to those who will find that topic very interesting when the poster comes out. Thanks again. Appreciate it.